I was given a copy of Traction. I read it. And after being a CEO for 20 years, I read this book. I'm like, oh my God, here's every mistake I ever made running the business.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a super exciting one. So you and I had the opportunity to connect. We connected through JBS, which JBS seems to know everybody. But I remember our conversation like 4 or 5 months ago, and you have an incredible story. And what I wanted to start with today, and obviously there's EOS that's involved in this journey, and YPO and a whole bunch of other amazing things. But I wanted to start something that kind of stuck out to me because I moved to LA not too long ago, and they call it the industry is how I keep hearing people talk about this idea of like working in the production and film and things like that. And it looks like your journey started in the industry, and then you started your own company. So walk me through that. How did you get into the industry, and then everything just kind of took off from there?
Yeah, so I would say the industry was because I spent 10 years at Sony, and Sony's a big part of the industry. Now, I'm old, so when I was in the industry, it wasn't so much as dominant as it was now. I actually started at Sony in the consumer electronics area. If you go back to when the CD player got rolled out, our parents knew who had the first color television on the block. I know who had the first CD player on the block because I had it a year before we shipped them. So I was in consumer electronics. That was before they went into motion pictures and became what they are today. But somewhere along that journey, about midway through that 10 years, I took a turn into the industry and went to work for Sony Professional Audio, and then started providing Sony professional audio gear in a sales capacity, to be honest, to the recording industry. So I was in and out of a lot of studios, then ultimately went to New York to be the studio manager for Sony Classical Productions, which was the recording studio for the now Sony Classical label. So I was there for the inaugural sort of kickoff of that process. So that was in the industry. And then to tie it back to how I got into my own business, like so many entrepreneurs, had a friend from school, played in a band together in college, who was getting a PhD in computer science and wanted to start a business, and had started doing some software development training at the university extension. And it became clear to me that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to have an organization. I didn't have a clear understanding of what that might look like, but just working for a large company probably wasn't going to get me where I wanted to go, or to have the impact that I wanted, where I was just a cog in a much bigger wheel. So when I had the opportunity to co-found that business, I took it and came back to California, and then hung out the shingle and started into the IT training space. And that led me to where I am now. So that's the weird curve.
I love it. So did you know, like at a very young age, did you have this like entrepreneurial spirit, or knew you wanted to be a part of something big? Or was it once you got into kind of big corporations, you were like, I have a lot of talent, and I can put this talent to use to make larger impacts in society? Like, where did it happen later, or was it earlier?
No, it happened in New York, and it was very clear, and it was very much a life-changing moment. And it wasn't one of those I have a lot of talent moments. Those come few and far between. But what it was I was young. I want to say I was 28 when I went to New York to be the studio manager. It was a new organization with new opportunity, and really a compelling, unique time and place to be there. I mean, we had budgets and the best equipment and the best artists and the best, like, everybody should be on fire with what a great, rare opportunity it is. But we were all kind of miserable on some levels, and it was organizational. And for me, as at 28, it was my first quote unquote management job. I didn't know better. It sounds good. Like, I really wanted to do this, and I got invited and asked to go do it. So I did it. I don't think the hiring process, a good hiring process, would have vetted me and not hired me for this job. But I got put in, and then they said, well, you're in charge. And I literally had 24 direct reports. Bad idea. So here you have a first-time manager, 28, no experience leading and managing, with 24 direct. This is a recipe for disaster. Absolute disaster. And it was probably the most stressed out even though I was doing work I loved and excited by the opportunity, I was just so beyond miserable. So the aha moment was I just realized this isn't going to work. Something's got to change. And I realized maybe I'll start with me. And I had read a couple books. One was The Macintosh Way by Guy Kawasaki. And another one was, I think it's out of print now, Not for Bread Alone by I can't pronounce his name, Konosuke Matsushita, the guy who started the Japanese conglomerate Matsushita. And it just like reframed, like, you got to take care of the people. It's about more than the money was the gist of it. And it like opened my eyes to like, if you actually lead and manage well and take care of these people and support them and create opportunity for them and give them some guidance, and you have a responsibility to them, not just to the business. I just started making some subtle shifts, and suddenly it started clicking and working. And I saw people were happy. And when they're happy in their work, they're happy at home, and they're happy in their schools, and they're, da 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 da, and on down the road. And that was the light bulb moment, because I'm like, if I can create an organization where people can come together and vocationally thrive and work together, then I can impact their world and the worlds that they're in. And that's like, that's the holy grail for me. That's where I'm making a difference. Money is nice, but just getting people to be part of something that's rewarding has just a knock-on effect beyond the business. And I just find that's became my sort of highest calling. And that's what really clicked in. I realized, well, I could stay at Sony for the next umpteen years and I'll just be in this giant machine. And I loved it. It was a great company to work for and it was great experience, but I'm not going to be able to create that environment. And so I kind of walked out of Sony going, I have to be an entrepreneur. I have to start and found some kind of an organization. Whatever it is, has to be one that people put a lot of pride into, that they care about, and that we're going to care about them, and we're going to try and sort of impact the world through just the quality of the work we're doing together. And that just set me down that path. And today, as an EOS implementer, I do it in a disconnected way because they're not my organizations. The leadership teams are leading it, but I kind of get to do what I care most about at scale through a handful of leadership teams because they're impacting the organizations and the quality of the people that are working. So that was the light bulb moment. And it's been very much a defining guiding force since that came on. So that's where the journey started. It was just like a totally bad situation that should have never happened. And I just realized I got to change directions. So
that's awesome. I mean, and it sounds like you learned a lot through that. It's been interesting because throughout my military career, especially in the earlier days, I didn't pay much attention to the leadership development or the development that was happening like while I was living it. And now what I find myself more often than not is like relying upon prior experiences to use better judgment, to make better decisions, whatever the case may be. What were, at 28 years old, you're just thrown into the fire. Hey, make it happen. Go figure this thing out. I'm sure there was quite a few things that like you carried with you throughout the rest of your entities. Like, what was that one thing where you were like, this was the biggest nugget and this is what I'll take with me, or what I've taken with me throughout?
Yeah, I think that the biggest nugget was the one I described, that the people really matter. You're not going to get there without the people in the organization. And you've got to be attentive to that. Because I went with the excitement of recording these records, being involved in the technical community of recording and the opportunity in the industry and the sound engineering and all that stuff was really the glamorous stuff. But the takeaway was it's about the people. The organization will not thrive, it will not succeed without the people. And you actually have a much bigger impact. And just for me personally, it was way more satisfying to see the output or the transition that happens in people when they're growing, when they're thriving. And that was just way more interesting and rewarding than the actual work that we were doing. So the takeaway for me was I wanted to be involved in helping create great organizations. And I tried to do that in my own. But that was, and what I always said to friends is like, we could make paper cups. Like, I don't care what we're doing. It doesn't have to be sexy, but it has to be coming together and doing work, really well together and supporting one another and growing and learning. And I've always had this philosophy And I'm able to live it much more now than I did, back in the day, of like, people that I get the opportunity to work with won't work with me forever. But during that time, I want both of us to exit that relationship better equipped for the experience together than when we came in. And I think if we can do that for each other, things are good. So that was kind of the takeaway. It's just I got to stay focused on that, and it didn't really matter the industry, although I still love the music industry, still love software and technology, and on those things. But it's really about the people for me.
I'd love that. And like you and I are like speaking the same language. And I'll say like, I don't know if it's common but I would say it's not a consistent philosophy. So one of the biggest questions I get today is like, hey, how do you go from zombie races to murder mystery experiences into recruiting? Like, how do you make those types of transitions? And what I say is like, I don't really have a passion for putting people through an obstacle course race, or for developing or creating immersive experiences, or for recruiting. Like, I have a passion for creation ideas and bringing people together around some common vision or some common goal. Like, that's what excites me.
Yeah, we are speaking the same language for sure.
Yeah. I could, like, you hear, and I think Steve Jobs had talked about this, but he's like, you got to be deeply passionate about the problem that you're solving. And like, I'm deeply passionate about bringing the right people together and getting them aligned around the problem that we're solving versus the actual problem itself.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. It's funny, as you were saying that, passion is used in business context a lot. It often gets suggested as a core value when we're trying to build an intentional culture. Like, oh, we're passionate. We want passion to be, but it's such a throwaway word because you can't fabricate it, right? And there are a lot of people who like their jobs, but they're really not passionate about what that company is in the business of doing, or even their role in it, even though they like the skill or whatever. But as a human, they are passionate about something, so we all are about several things, but to the degree that people can get their true passions lined up with where they spend their time professionally, wow, get out of the way. That's really cool. So I just want to try and invite people to connect with what really matters, and then look for opportunities that align with that. Because if you get into that alignment with your kind of your purpose and what you care most about, it just makes the work really fun. It lifts your energy a lot.
I have a couple buddies that actually they think like this, where the product or service that they have, like, they look for people that are specifically passionate about that. And so I'll bring up an example without giving away who it is, but let's say it's like fans, like fan manufacturing. Like, someone has to be passionate about building fans and the air that it moves, or something around that. And I think what you and I are talking about here is there's more to be passionate about, other than the actual making or selling of whatever that consumer product is. Is there a way that you've tested for that? Like, when you're bringing someone through, if they don't have any experience or passion in the traditional sense of what it is, the problem that you're solving, is there something else that you're looking for as you're bringing them into the organization, or nurturing them inside of the organization?
Well, it's funny, as you talk about it, the passion sometimes isn't, this is what went through my mind. Sometimes the passion isn't around that product or services. So you use the example of making fans. Like, I have a fan on my desk. I'm not super passionate about it, so long as it keeps me cool, right? But it brought to mind a manufacturing client that I had, and they make drawer boxes and cabinets, and that's like a fan. It's like really important, but I don't get like super excited about it. But what the passion for these guys that founded this company, it's a family business, multi-generational, and what their passion was, which is one that I connected with as the opportunity to work with them for a little bit with EOS, was creating financial security for the families that are employed there, because they are a family business. That business is providing financial security for them, and to create the opportunities for the families that work there. That was really their passion. They happened to do it by creating these things. So sometimes what they're passionate about isn't the thing right in front of you, which is what they do. Maybe there's another thing. And as I help teams get to that point, often the founders who had the original entrepreneurial idea, if you happen to be able to speak with that person, if they're still involved in the business, a lot of times there is a spark that occurred back in the day that got them there. And then so that story often will resonate with people coming into the organization. It says, no, I share that. And then there creates the alignment, and away you go. Very much like you and I are connected on the same thing, because life experiences are bringing us here to have this conversation. So look to the founders, and sometimes the passion isn't the business, but the business is a way to enable the fulfillment of that. But getting clear about it does help a lot.
Oh, and I promise we're going to get back to your story. I just
No,
love
no,
the
no.
thread that we're on.
That is my story. That's still living. So
one of the things that you said, and you were talking about kind of this, the founders, and generally, like, there is, regardless of where the founders find the passion, there is passion, there's energy, and there's focus. There's a lot of things that come from founder-led companies. And the reason it's top of mind, went to Six Flags over the weekend, and
you're really getting into Southern California now, so that's good.
Listen, we're doing it all. We're buying our t-shirts and everything. But like, you know, the differences between like private equity and kind of like the corporate and let's just call it like founder led. Like sometimes it comes down to like quality and attention to detail and all of these different things. Like, is your approach or your perspective on founder led companies, like what are some of those challenges or keys between both of them? So when you think about like a non-founder led, like keeping that energy, keeping that, all of those things alive versus not.
Yeah, I don't know it's so much that I have a specific approach, but as you were describing it, like an observation went through my head. So if we're dealing with organizations, entrepreneurial companies where the founders are still present, or they're, even if they've left, whatever that DNA is still going. But when that's still there, you just have to align with it and connect with it. And the more people that do, it creates that culture. It's very organic. It's wonderful. And I think you know that. Then what happens is ultimately, if say a private equity firm or a financial buyer takes it over, and that after many years of experience and hard work, the founder has an opportunity to go do something else or slow down or get their life back or whatever, which, you know, you got to respect that. Now it's a different motivation. That secret sauce isn't there. There's a financial buyer who needs to get financial returns, which all makes sense. So then coming back to the passion, it's just different. And it doesn't mean it's not there, but it may be more in line with what are we as a team trying to get done for the next decade, right? Because all organizations have this phenomenon, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it kind of illustrates the point of being in the right place at the right time with the right people. And just there's this perfect storm of circumstances that, you know, you can look back and go, wow, I was there in the day when we made that difference, right? So if you have a financial buyer and you're on that team, it's like, what are we trying to create? If we're going to lean into this thing and we're going to spend the next 5-10 years of our careers here, what do we want to look back and feel like, wow, that was worth the journey? And therein lies, you know, where you can go to connect into those passions, because you do want, everybody wants to be significant, everybody wants to make a contribution, and everybody wants to do it. But it's the same thing, is getting to that next thing that provides that juice for you. But it'll be different than maybe the founder DNA. They'll have to find it organically on what matters for them, I guess, is the summary of that.
Yeah. What was interesting, so when we think about EOS, Hunt to Killer ran on EOS, we run on EOS today. Love EOS was a life changer for me in so many different respects. And when we think about, or when we originally thought about the 10-year target, we were self-implementing in the early days at Hunt to Killer. Then we went out, we had Margaret Dixon, shout out. She helped us understand that we were not actually implementing at that time. But the whole idea of this 10-year target, like originally we had put monetary values, and it was like, in 10 years, we want to be 100 million, or in 10 years, we want to be 150 million. And I don't think we really saw it at the time. We didn't see it until we changed it. And we changed it to something that, like, I don't know, was easier for everybody inside of the organization to like see and envision. And I think for us at Hunt to Killer, was like, you know, we've impacted 10 million lives through our experiences. Do you find the same thing where like tying things to broader visions helps.
It's so funny because you asked me if I'd used our podcast software before, and I don't do a lot of podcasts, but coincidentally, I did one, as you know, just a couple hours before, and it was with Aaron North, who was at the time the CMO of Mint Mobile. If you remember Mint Mobile, they're still out there. They got acquired by T-Mobile, and we were going through the VTO and what they had been through in the past. And I'm illustrating Aaron's story because it hits exactly on what you're saying. There was a moment in the session, their 10-year target was to become the $1 billion, that's billion with a B, $1 billion challenger brand. And the interesting part of this goes full circle back into your passion, is if they had just said, we want to be $1 billion company, I don't think they would have cared. I mean, they wanted to win financially, but it was to be the $1 billion challenger. They wanted to be this other entity that was sort of poking the bear of the wireless industry and trying to do things differently. It was their identity of making that difference and reframing what's possible in wireless and challenging Verizon. And it was that the passion was in being the challenger brand. And that was the thing. So it lines up with your experience perfectly. A lot of people feel like, well, we got to put up a number. And we do, because that's financial security for everybody. And we have to provide growth. But if you just focus on that at the expense of something deeper, it doesn't have the same legs. And I was listening to Aaron this morning, and I'm like, it was just such a great illustration of like, we've got to tap into what matters to the people and what are they passionate and what excites them. And it was interesting because we were talking about that moment when they said that, and like, we were like, are we really committing to this? And then a few years later, I remember the session was like, and we review the VTO, as you know, every 90 days. And here's the core target. It's like, this is pretty much dialed in now. This is, it was clear that it was going to happen, and it has happened. And so, but it was just rewarding. But I would say on that, it was the connection to what mattered to them emotionally as much as anything to do with the, quantitative dollar amounts.
That's such an interesting 10-year target, because like, when I think about ones that I've created in the past, they've all been, when I say aspirational, I also mean like, not positive. The word that I'm trying to describe it escapes me, but it's this notion of like, everybody's in it together, and it's less of a war cry. It's more of a like, I don't know, a great dream. The whole idea of being a $1 billion challenger, that's an underdog story. That's a competition story. That's a chip on the shoulder story. Like, I could almost see, and maybe you can speak to this, but does that also start to not dictate, but guide sort of like who we hire and who we bring on the team? Like, these are people that are competitive and like ready to make big change.
Well, I think the values of the organization is really what drove the hiring. And Aaron had some great stories from that. And it was just, yes, when you think about what's the culture we need to get there, what business are we in, to use the structure, right? Our core values on our culture, our core focus in the business, and that's where we want to go. All of that does align with that challenger identity for sure. So, and I think, to put a little EOS in it, that's where the VTO and the alignment, those 8 questions, right, in the VTO, all have to like make sense and hang together. And if you get it right, it does. And so they had that confluence, and it all hung together really well.
Okay. All right. Let's get back. I took us way on a tangent. Let's
it's a fun tangent.
Okay, so you started this company. So this was a person that you knew, you said, in college?
Yeah. We played in the band together.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you played in the band together. He was getting his PhD. You guys came up with this thing. You came back from New York City, and take us from there.
Yeah. Well, I would give credit where credit is. I didn't come up with it. He came up with it. He was actually putting himself through college, teaching at the University Extension at UCI, and he was quite gifted at this technical stuff. And where I'm going is sort of the visionary integrator relationship in EOS. If you know that, here was a guy with a great talent and great vision, and he wanted somebody to help implement the business. And so even though I was in the industry, as you like to say, in the creative space, I had a sales and marketing background from that time, and he wanted somebody that he trusted to put the business wrapper around what he envisioned. And so for the first decade there, we were very much in that visionary integrator thing. And so that's really where it took off. And so it was a great ride for me. It wouldn't have happened without him, and it wouldn't have happened without the team we had. But yeah, that was my role. And then he ultimately got an opportunity to go to Microsoft and left. And I believe he's still there and has continued to thrive there. But it was interesting because the visionary, which I was trying to support, was now not there, and I had to sort of pivot and get a sense of like, well, now I need a vision for what I want as the organization. So that was a big learning curve on that journey, which was insightful.
Did you already understand the visionary integrator dynamics, or was this later looking back?
No. So this is an open, honest, full disclosure moment in your podcast series. I checked out a few of your other interviews who are implementer friends of mine, and the ones I listened to, always there was that moment where you hit EOS and like we have this entrepreneurial journey. And then once we saw EOS, the light came on, it was great. I never ran the business on EOS. I did not know about it. And that was just by coincidence. I was given a copy of Traction when I was just entering into the sale process for the business after 20 years of running it. And this is literally how I tell clients that I'm introducing myself to for the first time. I was given a copy of Traction. I read it. And after being a CEO for 20 years, I read this book. I'm like, oh my God, here's every mistake I ever made running the business. Because it's true. I can see everything. And we had a lot of good people. We had a lot of good luck. We were in the right place at the right time. We were one of those magical places for a time. And then industry changed and everything. But I look back on it now and I could see organically all the fits and starts that had we been running on EOS would have been like, oh, well, that's issues processing, or that was getting everybody aligned on the vision. Or as I mentioned earlier, there's a visionary integrator relationship, which would have changed my dynamic a lot with my partner because I would have understood our roles and our lanes in a different way. So I think for me, one of the reasons I got so committed to EOS and one of the reasons I enjoy it as much as I do, and I'd like to think I make a bit of a difference with the clients I work with, is not so much that, well, I did it in my company, so let's do it. It's like, no, I had to suffer through 20 years of not doing it in my company. And so when we look at why we're doing this one thing, it's like, no, I know exactly how the hard way to do that is. So I just think that experience has really helped me. And now after 8-9 years, I've got enough reps to see that how that gets applied. But yeah, it was like I didn't run on EOS, but that made it all the more viscerally obvious where all parts of it could be applied.
Interesting. And so as you're also exploring this visionary role, so it sounds like you very much were playing the integrator. They say what, less than 2%, I forget what the actual statistic is, but less than 2% of people are great at both visionary and integrator. Have you heard?
Yeah, I don't remember what the statistics are. But it was interesting because remember, my whole business experience is happening with no knowledge of EOS. In fact, we started the company in the 90s. Gino published Traction in 2010. So we're 15, 16 years ahead of that. So I have no idea about it. By the time I was in the sale process, it was now 5-6 years post publishing. So I came to it very late in the process, but coming in, it was really obvious that my partner was gifted, had a clear vision, wanted to make a difference. And I do not have a technical background. So we were teaching software development. So there was no way for me to lead there. And so I was literally just like, great idea. I'll build a process around that, or I'll set up a sales team to go sell that, or we'll market that. I was just sort of being the integrator, running the day-to-day stuff, not appreciating the synergy between the two like I do today. That relationship is so pivotal today. And we kind of had it, but we didn't know we had it. And then when he got the opportunity to go to Microsoft and left, and then I realized, well, like, where's the vision coming from? I just had lived in a world where the vision was coming from the visionary, and he was quite gifted in that regard. And it's like, oh, now I got to have one. But so it took a little time to find my sea legs. And if you do the rocket fuel, you've been through the crystallizer assessments on rocket fuel.
Is that the online one?
Yeah. Mark Winters and the Rock Fuel guys, they did like, are you a visionary? Are you an integrator? I'm pretty high on both, and I really light up with both, but I'm actually tipped a little bit on visionary side. It's just the fun creative part of it. But long story short, I had to pivot, and then I had to have a vision, but I didn't have an integrator. So it was, in the latter years, it was a much more of a struggle to run the business because I had to create vision. I had to create vision in a changing market because the internet bubble had burst. So, the industry was changing. Then we had to get through the 2008 recession. There's just a lot of headwinds, and ultimately the business and that industry, which was learning and development, training, corporate training, as you know, just went away. It just changed, right? And so I was trying to navigate all of those headwinds while trying to build a vision, and I didn't have an integrator to come in and keep all the trains running so that I could focus more time on that. I was really carrying it all myself with the people I had, which were great people, but it's a harder road. And I've had a lot of EOS teams say, they wouldn't have gotten through COVID if they hadn't had the discipline. And I don't think if we had been running on EOS, it would have been a lot different because the industry changed. EOS isn't a cure for an industry that's changing. But man, could we have dealt with the headwinds more directly, more quickly, more honestly, more real about the conversations, and might have made better decisions at a faster rate if that discipline was understood at the time. And as the guy in charge, it was not understood at the time. We did our best, but it would have been transformational, which again is one of the reasons I love it so much, because it's like, oh, wow, I can see where it applies.
It's really interesting because everything you just said resonates. Like, we were also operating on EOS when we went through the pandemic, and I believe that was one of the reasons that we were able to handle the headwinds the way that we did, and things actually in the e-commerce space broke loose, and so our headwinds were actually tailwinds, but it was just as problematic because trying to build infrastructure and everything else in that environment was problematic. But looking back on it, we went through some very challenging times, and there's a variety of reasons. I was in Vistage at the time, and in Vistage, we would always talk about this notion of like revenue or client saturation. And my feedback or my idea there was like, that's not us. We have, at that point, we had like 150,000 active subscribers. So 150,000 people every single month were receiving a subscription box. And I was like, we are as diversified as you can possibly get. That wasn't necessarily true. And for two reasons. One, we were heavily concentrated in a single channel, meaning like direct to consumer, no retail at that point, no anything else. And then number two is that we were heavily concentrated on an advertising, a single advertising channel. So 85% of our advertising went through Facebook. And at the time, we were spending upwards of $150,000 a day in Facebook advertising. And I never put that in the context of like, gosh, if this channel just went away or something just happened, like that would crater the business. We got ahead of some of those things because we did eventually get into retail, and that was great. But we had a contracting direct-to-consumer business, and our retail business was going great. But as you probably know, the cash cycles for retail are very different than direct-to-consumer. And so I look back of like, what could I have done kind of sooner to those days? Like, EOS was great for being able to navigate and setting accountability goals. Some of the things that I failed to do was kind of look 3, maybe 5 years into the future to kind of diversify or de-risk some of those other things. This is the longest possible like warm up for. Do you ever look back like before those headwinds started and said like, these are a couple of things that if I would have thought about differently, we could have navigated differently?
Not so much the answer to that question, because that's contextual depending on the industry and the circumstances and time and business model that you're in. But there's a very clear pattern that you're activating with your story, which I experienced firsthand. And it gets to some of the discipline that current businesses who are starting their EOS journey struggle to connect in with, particularly if they're in high growth mode. And as you were telling your story, which was the same as mine, so we're connected on this part as well, it's that old adage that revenue masks all sins, right? You were thinking you were diversified, but things are just going up. Of course, we're the smartest kids on the block. Look how much growth we're having. And you have that swagger that comes with your success. And what that swagger does and that confidence, which is enjoyable and you should celebrate it and it's all good, it undermines the discipline that you need to build the infrastructure and the accountability and the processes and the systems underneath the headwinds, because you're going to need all that stuff when the wind changes. And I see that over and over again in high growth, fast moving companies where there's so much success on the top. They're like, why do we need to do this? Why do we have to get into process? Why is this important? It's like, no, it's working. Look what we're doing. It's working. It's like, yeah, it's working today. But I haven't seen a business where the trajectory stays permanent, right? Those are few and far between. So it's just like, don't take for granted your success. There's a lot of factors, your contributions, talent, but there's timing and luck and economy and lots of other stuff. But that success can really mask the health of the organization if you're not taking the time to do it. You still need that, because something will change, and then that's when it's going to count. So I would say that's the one go forward nugget.
And do you, as you're thinking through that, maybe through the lens of EOS and the accountability, like, are there things that you're constantly thinking about, like maybe while you're going through client sessions of like, maybe they have accountability down, maybe they've got a picture perfect VTO at this point, but you're like, there's other ways to grow, or there's other ways to diversify. Is that, and maybe that's eked out on the SWOT analysis, but how do you think through some of those more strategic level things?
Well, there's a couple things. The EOS is premised on all the right people being in the room, and that the answers are in the room. And I think, to quote the statistic, 95, 99% of the time that's true if you can get all the ideas out on the table. Once in a while, you may be in a fast moving industry, or you may be trying to make a pivot into an area where the people on the leadership team around the table actually haven't been there themselves. The experience just isn't there. And so they lack the capacity to bring that different perspective in the room, or things are changing so fast they can't see around the next corner. And that's tricky. And I think in those moments, it's just important to recognize we don't have the information we need. Now let's IDS, to quote the phrase, let's solve that problem, figure out, okay, what input do we need? Where are we going to get it? What forms are going to come in? What are we going to do with it? But just be conscious that we have a blind spot as a leadership team, and we're going to have to go outside the EOS framework, get some new ideas and bring it back in, and then connect it up, because EOS is utterly brilliant at that, getting on the same page with what we're doing and then executing against that vision. But if you can't pull those ideas, if it's not obvious to the team, then sometimes you have to do a little outside thinking about that. So I do see that pattern.
What I talked a little bit about Vistage, and you're in YPO, correct?
I'm in YPO, yeah.
What type of impact has that had as you've gone on this journey?
Oh, sorry, that's an overloaded question, because it would be hard to imagine life as I know it without my peers in YPO. The amount of support and candor and perspective that I've gained through 25 years of YPO can't be overstated. And I will probably emotionally lose my shit if on your podcast here, if I start really unpacking some of the experiences I've had, because it impacts life across everything. It's not just the business, it's life. And so, so I can't say enough about it. So I'm a staunch advocate of finding your tribe, finding your peers. And I think there's any ways that we can do that. You mentioned Vistage, and you're going to be joining EO. Those are all great groups. YPO is a great group, but there's just no substitute for sitting around, having candid, open, honest conversation with people who understand the shoes you're walking in, and they've got some experience that is not yours. And the diversity of that experience from 6-8 people that have all been down a road similar enough to yours that you can trust their input just blows your perspectives and your learning and your reference and what you can do and the people that you can call. It's just transformational. You cannot get it on your own. So I'm just a staunch advocate for find your tribe, get into a peer group. I would like, since your podcast is for entrepreneurial communities, those of us that have been a CEO have a lot of good peer groups, YPO, EO, Vistage. There's a bunch of great ones. What our industry needs is it needs great functional peer groups with the same appreciation for the finance leaders, for the sales leaders, for the HR leaders. Because this human connection, it comes back to passion, and you're sort of activating a little bit here in me, is like, we can learn at a much higher rate when we are sitting with people who are doing the same thing that we do, but have a different experience in it. It's just a massive accelerant on learning. And our functional leaders need that same thing. They would absolutely benefit sitting down with a CFO, if you're a CFO, and sitting in a group of 10 or 12 CFOs that are all running completely different businesses, but have their, what's on the line to perform financially and execute and build those systems, like, and untangle all that. So it's like huge. So I would love it if industry and the business community would get peer groups going beyond the CEO level. That's a pretty healthy ecosystem, as you and I know, but man, the other leaders need it across the board.
That's so smart. I've got this group. It's called Creators Combine, and we started it at the onset of the pandemic. And essentially, like from my professionalized CEO peer group, I was able to get everything kind of at the strategic level. But if I would have walked into my peer group and said, "Hey, my customer acquisition cost, doubled overnight, and my LTV is now," everybody would look at me cross-eyed, because there was I was in a Seattle chapter at the time, but it was like aviation, toy companies, like other things like that. And so I started this kind of tactical level where it was direct consumer operators. And I thought about that from different industries, where it's like you could have that for, dentists and people that have their own practice. I never thought about it at different levels inside of organizations. If you want to start another business, I'm happy to go in that with you, because I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, it's a trick. I've thought about it and played with it, and it is out there. And there's little elements of it popping up. It has its own challenges with scale and the business model, but even if it's organic and just grassroots, it's great. I have a group of HR leaders that are all running on EOS, and they're all really good people, and they care so much, and they use these tools and process. And I finally just connected them and said, you guys need to know each other. You need to talk. You're all doing the same thing with the same tool set in different companies. And so they're not as formal as the potential is for them. And I've sort of let them know that, but they do talk they have a Slack channel, and they're comparing notes, and they go to each other with different, like, well, how are you doing your reviews? And, what platform are you using for your payroll processing? And how are you dealing with this, that, another? And so I know there's some back and forth conversations, and they see the potential, but I just didn't have the capacity to like formally set up a business around that. But to your point, it's absolutely indispensable, right? We all need it. We're humans, and we're growing, learning machines. And the pedagogical, like, oh, here's how you do a sales process, is totally different than sitting around with 8 other sales leaders about how they're doing it and how they're aligning their organization and dealing with everything. So it's a great area. I'd love for us to do more of that.
And today you're an expert EOS implementer. That's
yes,
correct,
that
right?
means my odometer is over 500 sessions is what that means. Let's be clear about that.
That's a special type. They were like, that's rare air in the EOS ecosystem. So you have been through a ton of sessions. What's like, let's say you're onboarding a new client. Like, is there one kind of consistent or common theme that you see as you're onboarding that companies will struggle with, or will need a little extra help with?
Yeah, it's the answer is so obvious. So here it is. There's a huge difference between doing EOS and running on EOS. They are vastly different. So see if this matches up to your own experience. Everybody comes to EOS for different reasons, but if I just do an oversimplified generalization, people want to grow and they want to do more, and they're pedaling, they're entrepreneurial, they're pedaling as fast as they can. Like, it's too hard. We're doing too much. We can't do it. We're not growing fast enough. And we're trying to do all this stuff, but it's just not enough. We need to do more. We need a system. So great. Let's get EOS. So now you have this super overhorsed team running at Redline who is hitting their limits and realizes they need a breakthrough. So what they do is they do EOS. So they take EOS and they put it on the to-do list of all the other stuff they're already doing, and they keep going. With one more action, they're going to get more done. And in fact, all they do is they just load up. When in fact, what happens, and it takes time, it just never happens in a day. We take EOS and we put it on the top of the pile, and they keep trying to grind it out the way that they always have. But over time, with some learning and some reflection and some discipline, it pivots upside down. And EOS becomes the foundation, because what we were trying to do with EOS is have the hard conversations about what has to get done to get where we're going. And at great expense and difficulty, what are we not going to do to pursue the things we have to do? And then let's just focus on doing that. And that's when the shift is made, because suddenly trying to do it all isn't appealing anymore, or trying to just do more faster isn't appealing anymore. And they really tune into we have to focus on just doing a few things really well. And they get really good at having the hard conversations to figure out what that is, and then not getting distracted and staying at their lane. And so when that ethos kicks in, then things change. That's when they start to bring it back. But I see that pattern over and over of like, yeah, we're doing all the right things. We have rocks, we have scorecards, but we're still as crazy as we've ever been. And it's like, okay, let's take a step back. Why are we doing EOS? What are we trying to affect there? But eventually, through with the mileage is, I don't know how that map. I'd be curious to hear how that maps to your experience. But once that light goes on, then things change.
Well, that takes me right back to, I think I said this earlier, and I was like, yeah, we went and saw Margaret Dixon, and she was like, what the hell are you guys doing? Like, so that was exactly it. It was probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 million mark is when we started self-implementing. We just thought we could do it. Like, we had a EOS implementer that came through my Vistage group. He gave us the book. I was like, this is a game changer. It was so for my team, it was always the Fridays after Vistage. We're like, oh God, here it comes. So like half the leadership team would probably take off work because they didn't want to hear all the great things that I learned the day before. But we spent a couple of years self-implementing, and we thought we were doing the things, but it's exactly what you were saying. Like, we were doing things, like we were creating lists, and we weren't on 90 at the time, so we were just in a Google Doc or something like that. But it wasn't until we went and saw Margaret where that transition happened, where like now we were powered, or we were running on EOS, versus like it's almost like it was another issue on the issues list each week, is like that was EOS.
Yeah. And tying it back to some of what we were talking about, like Margaret and I have the good fortune of being in a lot of leadership teams and being peers for ourselves. So we've seen a lot of stuff. And it's always our goal that you guys do this on your own. That's the goal. So self-implementing is laudable. It's great. You should be self-implementing. But we have the continuity of going in a straight line and not getting distracted. And we've seen a lot of other peers and colleagues and others. So we just have like all this perspective. Like, you can read the book and do it, but if you have a question, the book isn't going to answer the question. But we've seen a lot. So I think it's not that we add any special sauce. You guys are the ones doing the work in your business, but we just bring that perspective. And we can sort of keep you as a coach, keep you coming back to that thing until it settles in. And then when it clicks, it's like, you got this now. But it's a little bit like a personal trainer. I mean, not to trivialize this, but if you want to get healthy, everybody knows how to do that, right? You eat less and you exercise more. It's really simple. But how hard is it to stay on that for a consistent duration of time? Getting a trainer or a coach to ask the questions and make you do the reps, it clicks in. And then you get to a point where that becomes a habit, and you will live that way because your lifestyle has changed. And it's very similar. EOS is super simple, but probably just as hard as getting healthy. And it's a very consistent discipline over time. And an outsider is just going to be really effective at helping you do that, especially if they can bring perspective. So that's what makes the work really fun. But the goal is to get you on your own and get that click in. So it sounds like that lines up with your experience.
Yeah, and we eventually got clicking. I'm in. I don't know how many other people feel the same way. I was always in the camp, and I understand the graduation and like after 2 years we're trying to get you operating on your own. Like there is so much value that comes out of having a third perspective and someone that can like look at things from 10,000 feet as the team's operating. Like Margaret to me almost became like a confidant. Like after meetings, she would call me up and be like, "Hey, here are my observations. This is what I'm seeing. Have you thought about this?" And like it was just so powerful that I don't think we ever graduated, even though we got pretty good at it.
Yeah, there's, if we go back to the peer group model that we were talking about, in YPO, those peer groups, we meet regularly. I have one of my meetings today, and typically one of the members facilitates that meeting. We just rotate who's leading or moderating, as we call it, and that's fine. But the person leading doesn't get to be a participant 100% of the time because they're worried about keeping us focused and ending on time and making sure the different voices are done. It's what I call the moderator tax, right? So for a lot of teams, and this is why it would make sense to keep Margaret as your implementer for a long time, or really any implementer, the goal is to make sure you know how to do it on your own. But if the team is willing and the implementer is willing, can you just stay and facilitate this meeting? Because if I'm the CEO and you're running my meeting, I don't have to worry about the meeting. I can just be fully present and tuned into my team and thinking about my issues. And so it unlocks a freedom for them to participate that way. Now, most people don't do that because there's an ongoing expense, but there is an advantage to just having a third party facilitate your meeting so that you can drop in and be fully present with the team and only be focused on the issues at hand related to the business. So there are some clients that will keep that going. I have a few that do that, but the majority is to get you there.
Okay, I realize we are almost at time. So just a couple last questions. One is, so you are based in LA and we're basically neighbors now, so we'll see each other in real life. Um, what what do you look for in clients, prospective clients, and like also geography? So like, do you have a certain thing that you like look for, industries, or you agnostic?
No, I'm very agnostic. I want good people in good business. Let's go all the way back to the top of our conversation. People that care about their people, are intentional about creating an organization where their people can thrive, and they'll thrive through business success and growth and opportunity. So most of the clients that I have, I really connect with them on that level. So it helps me sort of fulfill that purpose. So I look for that. Um, from talking to a lot of EOS implementers, many of them will set up a session room that's all tricked out as the perfect meeting space, and the clients come to them. That's a beautiful fantasy. But in LA with freeways, nobody wants to come to me. And if you ask Margaret or some of the other people, what are you leasing a session room for? It's like, well, a couple $1,000s. It's like 15,000 in LA. It's insane. So I don't have one. So I like in person. I think there's advantages to it, but I have a few clients that will meet in person, maybe at the annual, and I'll do remotes because they're out of state. But that's very much the exception, only because it was a client referral, or more often a client YPO referral. And so I'll work with them. And so for me, if I do have a Zoom client once in a while, that's okay, because I can stay off the freeways for an extra hour. But generally, if you're in LA, west of the 405, south of Wilshire Boulevard, right in my neighborhood would be perfect. But I no industry agnostic, just good people wanting to do the good work, wanting to embrace the discipline and get that pivot we talked about as fast as possible. Then anything goes. And that's actually one of the funnest parts of this job, because the company I led, I was in that industry for so long, and now I'm in so many industries, and I'm in manufacturing and service, and I'm like, I'm sitting with a leadership team of a bank. Like, what am I doing here with a bank, right? That I have no banking background, but it really makes the rewards that much more fun and the learning great. So long-winded answer to say just about anybody, as long as you're good people and intentional, I'm happy to help them.
Perfect. So if someone's listening to that right now and they're like, "That's me, and I need some Mike Abercrombie in my life, and to come in and get us into shape," how would they get a hold of you?
You can always get us on the microsite. You go to EOS Worldwide, find an implementer, just type my name in, it'll come right up. You can also send an email to mabercrombie@eosworldwide.com. And yeah, I'd be happy to help.
Awesome. All right, Mike, thank you so much for, start on time, end on time. Thank you so much for spending 60 minutes with me. I appreciate it. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in real life in the future.
We're looking forward to it. We have to get that date. Thank you. Appreciate the time, Ryan.
Thanks, Mike.